1944. I was drafted. And I don't know whether you want to hear about it, but anyway, I was drafted and we were sent out to Leavenworth to take the tests. And I'm dyslexic. And I was extremely nervous. Being dyslexic, I had trouble, so I failed the test. And then the psychologist called me in. There were two of us, obviously. He called in, the rest of them went on their way. And so he interviewed us, and the other guy was retarded. And after he interviewed me, and then he gave me a non-language proficiency test, which is just comparing items on items. You have one picture, and you don't say anything. You look at the picture, and then you have four other pictures, and then you decide which one is connected to the first picture. It's different, but there's some connection that you can make. Anyway, and 7 years later, I was the psychologist giving the test to the draftees. That was quite a change. That was quite a change in my life, because as a dyslexic boy, I was always pretty much at the bottom of the class. And so when I went in, he called me, and then in August, I guess it was 44, and we took a bunch of tests, and they called my name, and I thought, well, it's going to be the end of the line. I said, they'll just send me home. And instead, they put me in charge of 5 other guys and sent me off to Camp Crowder. I'm 84. 84, yeah.
How long did you serve in the Army?
18 years in the Army, in the Air Force, and 2 years in the Army. Yeah. And I served 2 years, enlisted, came out as a, well, technical sergeant, T3 is what they call it. And then I stayed over there a year with MacArthur Center because it was terribly interesting, and also because I'd never graduated from high school. They had an educational program over there. And I met this lady who had been at Missouri. It's in Maryville. I think Northwest Missouri State, I guess it was at that time. And so I had an uncle, and he was the president of Missouri Northwest, and so we got to know each other, and I told her my problems, and she said, well, if you want to stay an extra year, well, I'll set up a curricula for you so you'll be able to go to college. So that's what I did. Instead of going out and drinking and carousing or anything, I had the spare time when I'd go to class with her. And the reason I got my commission was because the Air Force was just branching off from the Army Air Corps that year, 51. And they offered a course to anybody who had been a sergeant or above, to give them a commission with 1 semester of ROTC, and then you were commissioned. So I had the least amount of training for an officer on them. And then they sent me down to Oklahoma City and served there for not quite a year. And then they transferred me as a psychologist to Bangor, Maine. And it's a recruiting station for all the northern part of Maine. And I was a psychologist there and gave the tests and decided who could enter the service and who couldn't. They were running a check on me, top secret, and I could never tell what he was going to tell me. And so until the press started covering it, anyway, it was the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, which of course is the predecessor of the CIA. And so I trained for that, and then Germans surrendered, and I was still at Camp Crowder, and then went on over to Japan, and by way of the Philippines, and by the way of a little island called Inuitok. And it was because the atomic bombs had been dropped, and they told us on the boat that they had spotted a Japanese submarine, or picked it up on I guess it was sonar was just being started, and so it took us a month to get from California to the Philippines. And in the meantime, the Japanese surrendered, so that I never did serve with the OSS, but they put me through some special training. And as they now they've announced that what was her name? I made myself some notes because I have senior moments, and that might be a problem here, that I do have some senior moments. Anyway, what was her name? Julia Childs was, and they announced that she was in the OSS. I figured I'd say I was in the OSS. And then I got to General MacArthur's headquarters, and I was a cryptographer for him. And so I got to see a lot of messages that went back between him and the War Department. And he was the Supreme Allied Commander for the Pacific. Well, since he was the Supreme Allied Commander, by that time there were no other five-star generals. There was only Truman that outranked him. And he was very much a planner, and he just had his own ideas, and he would send messages to the War Department and just proclaim policies. It was almost like the Bible. He'd say, this is a policy of Supreme Allied Commander Pacific, and then he might get a message back from the War Department. It might be just in reverse of what he said, and he just didn't pay any attention to it. He ran that whole show, and I think the Japanese, and we should be very grateful for what he did. I mean, the idea of leaving the emperor in charge was his idea. And then they also had a thing about fraternizing. And the War Department didn't want the troops fraternizing or anybody fraternizing with the Japanese. And MacArthur pushed that, said we need to show them what democracy is like. They have questions, why work with them. So yeah, I sat in for a couple of days and it was just quite a bit like the Nuremberg trials. They had all the guys they were trying there. Can't remember how many there were. And they were just presenting the accusatory part of the trial when I was there, just telling things they had done and so forth. And I say there were a couple of industrial leaders and then the military leaders. Interesting, because I say they didn't take anybody, below the manufacturers and the military. They didn't try to go down very far, and most of the government officials that were there were left there, and then they had their elections. And the only time he really took an active part in it was when they were going to have the unions were being formed, and they were communist-led, and they were going to have a big demonstration in Hibbia Park, which was just across the street and around a block away from his headquarters. And so up until the day it was going to take place, he didn't do anything, and then he just sent a few troops into Hibbia Park and said, you'll not make this demonstration simply because it'll hurt Japan, it'll hurt you, and you aren't in any position to have strikes at this time, so he just prohibited them from having.